Thank you, Rita, and thank you, Brian. I want to start by saying thank you to Pasa. Everyone at Pasa has been so great in bringing me here. I want to say a special thanks to Kristen and Lauren, who right from the start have just been this perfect blend of generosity and precision, and it's made this trip great. This conference is really inspiring. I only wish that I could be in every single workshop, but I'm going to buy all the tapes. So, someone's waving. You can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Here we go. Is there a way to turn up the volume? Yeah? Okay. Well, bear with me. And in addition to thanking Pasa, I want to thank all of you for staying. I know that maybe some of you didn't have the choice. For me, coming from California, the snow is a huge treat, but I know that for a lot of you, it's just a big pain in the neck. So I appreciate your being here, and hopefully we get through the sound issues. I'm going to talk for just under an hour today, and during that time we're going to look at some photographs, and I'm going to tell some stories, and hopefully we're going to have some fun, and then you all will leave here and take over the world, or at least that's the plan. And what I'm going to talk about today is what I see as a need as we move into deeper into the 21st century, this need to redefine the role that farmers play in our society. But before I get into the present and the future, I want to do just a brief agricultural history lesson. I promise that it won't be like in school, if you ever had a boring agricultural history class. This is for the sake of looking at how we got to our current definition of what it means to be a farmer in the United States. Over the course of our nation's history, the role that farmers have played has changed a number of times, but essentially there have been these two basic stages. And the first one was farmers as citizens. They were simply the people who made up the majority of the society, and their role was simply to be that human population that comprised this new society that was taking root here in North America. If you think back to the first colonists, their role in society was simply to lay the bricks and to plow the fields on which the first communities were built. And it was out of those communities that our cities grew, and out of those cities that the nation grew. Now, as the nation moved outward during westward expansion, the role remained more or less the same for farmers. Their role was to be those people on the ground. This photograph is from Custer County, Nebraska in 1888. And as you can see, it shows a farm family there. And you can also see that everything that isn't the land itself is something that they put there. Either they brought it there or they built it from the earth itself. If you could zoom in on the photograph, you would see that their house is built out of sod, literally out of the earth itself. As you look at this photograph, I want you to consider that at this time, these people and people like them were the only people in the society who could have done this. Railroads and traders would follow them, and the military and the explorers had preceded them. But at this time, the only people who could do this work of actually expanding American society, of going into a wild place and actually building a lasting community, the only people who could do that were farmers. So this next photograph is by a farmer named Ferd Pazendak. It's from Fullerton, North Dakota in 1910. It's the southeast part of North Dakota. And what you see here is a Minnesota steam tractor pulling a John Deere plow. And if you look at the horizon, you can see that there is not even a tree on the horizon, much less a grain elevator or a town. And if you look on the left side of the photograph, you see, I hope you can see, I hope it's clear enough, that it is wild grass, virgin sod. And as this tractor moves to the left, moves to the west, it's turning this virgin sod into these folds of earth that stretch up into the right-hand corner of the picture, the right-hand horizon. Now, this is an extraordinary photograph, in my opinion, first because they're breaking virgin sod. This is land that up to this point for millennia had been exactly that, wild virgin sod. But the real reason why this is extraordinary is that Ferd Pazendak, with his camera, caught on film the very moment when this little piece of the planet became a part of the United States, effectively. These farmers were farming, of course, but what they were doing was more than that. It was this act of claiming, of incorporating, of folding this place into the nation of the United States. And in many ways, they were the true founders of the West. This next photograph, and I apologize if it's a little bit dark, this is also made by Ferd Pazendak in Fullerton right around the same time. And it's the photograph, it shows a party to celebrate a barn raising. You can see the ribs of the barn in the background. And then in the foreground you can see men and women and children gathered around this big feast to celebrate the completion of this permanent structure in this new wild place. I include this photograph because I think it's a really important complement to that photograph of the men plowing. And here's why. The men and the plowing that they were doing, that act of claiming, it was monumental, but it wasn't the end goal. The end goal was to populate the land, and by doing that to expand the nation and to propagate opportunity and to spread democracy. That plowing that they were doing, that claiming, their goal was not just to pump out food or to claim as much land as they could. It was to create communities like this who are here celebrating this this moment of permanence in a new and uncertain time. This next photograph is from the Office of War Information, which was a division of the Farm Security Administration. It's a poster from 1941, and as you can see, it's sort of rallying farmers to produce more food for defense of the nation. And I include it here because I think it's an apt symbol of the second stage in this evolution of the role that farmers have played in our society. Around the turn of the century, there were a lot of changes that happened. Farmers had been playing this role of citizens through the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. Suddenly, at the turn of the 20th century, two significant changes. One, the frontier closes, so everybody gets to California and then starts filling in all that space. But more importantly, the nation fully makes the shift to an industrial economy, so away from an agricultural economy. And as a result, farmers really had no choice but to join this industrial economy and to take the role that it gave them, which was that of industrial producers. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with this role. And, you know, as evidenced by the sign, during wartime there was a great sense of pride and inclusion and meaning for a lot of farmers. Not to mention, a lot of farmers did some of their best business of all time during the wars. The problem with this role that farmers had to take as industrial producers is that over time, particularly over the second half of the 20th century, that role got distilled down to a very narrow thing, which was produce raw materials. No longer were farmers these agents of community and democracy. They became just more workers whose job was to produce as much as possible for the least cost in order to help the industrial economy grow. Now, ever since this incarnation happened, this second role began. Farmers have been fighting it. The photograph in the top left is from a protest that was part of what's called the Farmers Holiday Association, which is a group that organized farmer protests and strikes in the early 1930s. This photograph is from 1933. It is the Minnesota State Capitol building. And as you can see, there are hundreds of farmers there storming the steps, demanding fair prices, parity, etc. And this really struck me. When I was looking in the Minnesota Historical Society archives, I found the picture on the left. I also found the picture on the right. As you can see, it's the same building, just seen from the right. It's the same steps. And once again, it's being stormed by farmers. But this time, it's in 1985. 52 years later, 2 generations later, and the same thing is happening. And as I looked at these photographs, it occurred to me that it's very likely that a number of people in the right-hand photograph are the direct descendants of the people in the photograph on the left, the grandchildren probably. This is their inheritance. I have a certain interest in farmer protest movements, and when I look at the photographs, I'm always really struck by them. And it's because they're in such great contrast to this image of farmers that were fed in this country, along with this role of industrial producers. We've also come up with this sort of image of farmers that exists in our public mind. And that image of them is stolid and reserved and quiet. And if you see them, they're pictured in a rural landscape, sometimes with their families, most often alone, usually with a big piece of equipment in a big field in a big empty landscape. And if you hear about farmers' discontent, it's usually in the context of their impotence around solving it. They're going out of business, or they've just lost a crop to a drought, or they're fighting a flood, or what have you. And so that's why these photographs are so exciting, for me at least, to look at. Because an image of a single farmer alone is an image of helplessness. But then you get 200, 3,000 farmers together, and it reminds the rest of us that farmers still actually hold a place in our society. They actually have a role. They're not just some abstract concept, out in the sort of nebulous rural landscape that we may or may not ever visit. And what's more, it reminds us that this role that they've been given doesn't fit, and that nearly a century later, they continue to resist and reject it. This is a wonderful photograph by an Associated Press photographer from 1979. It's from a series of protests organized by an organization called the American Agriculture Movement, which some of you may remember. When you talk about strength in numbers, this group, this is in the second year of their protests, and what they did was in January 1979, they organized farmers from all over the country to get in their tractors and drive to Washington, D.C. They called it a tractorcade. I'm hearing some people remember this. And so in January, farmers as far away as Muleshoe, Texas, which is right on the border with New Mexico, got in their tractors. Some of them, it took them 18 days to get to Washington, D.C. Some of them got stuck in blizzards on the way. And you can imagine them shuffling along the highways at 15 miles an hour. Well, on February 5th, 1979, 1,800 tractors from around the country arrived in the vicinity of Washington, D.C. And they organized to approach the city from 4 directions on the highways. And again, you can imagine them 15 miles an hour. They ended up with this sort of impromptu performance piece whereby they forced all of the morning commuters to slow down to the pace of a farmer for once. Once they made it into the city, they formed a procession, led across the city, and